A few years ago, I had an extreme dopamine addiction, playing video games till 2 in the morning, binge watching YouTube all day. But in 2025, I was able to turn this dopamine addiction into a business obsession and build an online business that gave me time and location freedom. I used these exact same principles to develop a running obsession and run 12 marathons in 12 months as a beginner runner, as well as a language learning obsession to spend 4 hours a day learning Spanish for 7 months to become conversationally fluent. In this video, I'll break down exactly why being addicted to dopamine prevented me from becoming a successful entrepreneur, how I turned this dopamine addiction into a business obsession, and the 3 ways you can implement this addiction transfer depending on how you want to live your life. The only way that you can personally grow your business is through your output. And your output is made up of 2 very simple variables here: your volume and your leverage. Your volume is the amount of time that you put into your work, and the leverage is the return that you get on that time. So the question is, how is consuming cheap dopamine impacting this equation here and reducing our overall output? When we consume cheap dopamine, now I could be talking about social media, I could be talking about binge watching, I could be talking about scrolling, I could be talking about playing video games. There's a lot of things that we could be doing to produce cheap dopamine. But what's happening is our brain is receiving a huge amount of dopamine for not a whole lot of effort. Now, when we go to work on our business, when we go to produce real output, relatively, our brain is not so excited. We're not producing a whole lot of dopamine, and it's a whole lot harder to get this dopamine. So what happens is, when our brain is faced with the decision, with an option here between working on your business or consuming cheap dopamine, it is going to choose the cheap dopamine every single time because your brain receives a huge amount of dopamine. It feels really good when it does this behavior. And if we decide to work on the business, our brain doesn't feel fantastic. We're not receiving a huge amount of dopamine. Now, what this means is that over a long time horizon, every single time that you choose to work on your business, you're choosing the hard thing to do. You're working up the stream. You're working with friction here, and it makes it really difficult for you to work because you constantly have to say no to the thing that feels really good. And realistically, if we zoom out on this long of a time horizon, you're going to notice that sometimes you make the wrong decision. Sometimes you choose to consume the cheap dopamine. And realistically, it's not once, but it's many times. And how does this impact our output equation? Well, fundamentally, this means that the time that we were spending on our business, we're allocating to cheap dopamine. And what this really means is that we're allocating it to the bin, because cheap dopamine is really just a complete waste of time. Now, what this means is, in our output equation here, the amount of total volume that you're doing, that you're putting into your business, is going down. And as a consequence, your output is going down and you're going to grow slower. The second problem really explains why we have such a poor attention span and also why we get such poor returns on our work time. See, there's generally a certain amount of time that you have to wait between doing an action and receiving these endorphins, receiving this dopamine, feeling really good. But when we're consuming cheap dopamine, the time between us taking an action and receiving these good feelings is really short. You're thinking about maybe 10 seconds here, maybe one swipe of the finger, a very small period of time. And when we compare that to working on your business, you might be waiting 90 minutes. You might have to do an entire deep work block before you can really feel like, I've really progressed something forward. I feel really good. And what happens is, if we think about the amount of time between you feeling good, you receiving endorphins from doing work, over this 90-minute period, if you were consuming cheap dopamine, you could have received this feeling literally hundreds and hundreds of times. So what is your brain going to do? Your brain's going to think, well, of course, I would rather receive this feeling hundreds of times, not to mention the fact it's way easier for me to be consuming cheap dopamine than to be working on this business. So as a consequence, what's happening is that your brain is associating doing an action with waiting just a very small period of time, maybe 10 seconds, before it feels really good. So the idea of your brain working on the deep work task, working on your business, and having to wait 90 minutes before it receives some sort of endorphin, some sort of good feeling, it's not going to want to do that. It's going to go, not a chance. I want to do something that takes me 10 seconds and allows me to feel fantastic and is really easy. I'm not going to want to work on my business for 90 minutes before I feel anything. Not a chance. Even 30 minutes, your brain's probably going, no way, not a chance. I don't want to do this. So you end up only really being able to focus on one task for about 20 minutes at a time. And what does this mean? What does this mean if you can only focus on one task for 20 minutes? Well, it means that you can't get really strong returns on your work time. You can't go deep into one individual task because you know that every 20 minutes, you're going to get distracted. You're going to go and check your phone. You're going to open up a new tab. You're going to go do an easy task. You can't focus for long periods of time, so you can't get good returns on your work time. What does this mean in terms of our output equation? Well, this means that your leverage is going down significantly because you might be putting in 4, 5, 6 hours a day, but if you have to get distracted every 20 minutes, if you can't maintain this focus, the returns you're getting on this time are a lot lower, and as a consequence, your output goes down and you're going to grow your business slower. Now, your attention span being terrible and you getting really poor returns on your work time is bad. Your brain always choosing the cheap dopamine over the work and therefore your volume going down. This is also bad, but the third thing is way, way, way worse than these two. But we were just talking about the amount of time it takes for you to take an action, feel some sense of endorphin, some dopamine, some good feeling in your brain. But what about the amount of time it takes for you to receive some sort of real accomplishment, to feel like you've progressed and moved forward? Well, if you're consuming cheap dopamine, you might only be waiting 20 minutes before you feel like you've progressed and moved forward. Maybe you're playing video games and you progress to the next level. Maybe you're watching a TV show or a movie and some big outcome happens. They progress, they upgrade their life in some way. Either way, you may only be waiting about 20 minutes to feel this sense of achievement, like you've progressed and moved forward. But what about your business? Well, your business, you might be waiting a year before you feel like you've really progressed to the next level, like you've really leveled up. This is a very, very big contrast. 20 minutes to 1 year is absolutely massive. And why this is such a problem is that if you have an online business, you're working on this exponential curve. And this is fantastic. We want to be working on these exponential curves, but the problem is at the very start, there is not a lot happening. There's a long period of time where there's not a whole lot of material growth. And for most people, when you don't see this progression and you're so used to feeling like you progress and move forward really quickly, you get to this point and you go, this is too slow, this doesn't work, there must be a better option. So you quit and you start all over again. You never pass this period where you really, really start to get these exponential returns. You stay at the bottom here and you never ever progress. Now, this is going to add a few problems because it changes your equation slightly. So if your equation is simply, okay, I take actions on my business over a certain period of time and eventually I'm going to achieve my goal. Eventually I'm going to progress to the next level of the game. But if you can't be patient, if you can't wait a long enough period of time, then you add in another variable, and that is luck. See, you know that I take actions on my business, but I need to get lucky for these actions to allow me to achieve this goal and progress to the next level within a small period of time, within 30 days, 60 days. Because if I don't have this luck, if I'm not able to achieve this goal within 30 days, maybe it takes me a year, then I'm going to quit. I'm going to give up and I'm simply not going to achieve this goal because I don't have the trait of patience. I simply cannot wait over a long enough period of time to see this goal come true. So what this means in terms of our output equation is if you decide to quit, if you decide to completely give up, then your volume is zero. And if your volume is zero, then 0 times anything becomes zero. You have zero output, you don't have a business, and you failed. This is the only way that you can possibly fail is by giving up. And if you don't have patience because you're constantly training your brain to find these rewards, to feel like you've progressed on an extremely small period of time and you can't wait over long enough time horizons, then the chance of you giving up goes up significantly, which means the chance of you failing also goes up significantly. So we have three big problems here. Our volume is going to go down, our leverage is going to go down, and the chance of us quitting and failing is going to go up. So, of course, we want to avoid this at all costs. The question is, how do we turn this dopamine addiction into a business obsession? Well, if we want to do this, we have to think about Brussels sprouts. What? Yes, we have to think about Brussels sprouts. Let's say that you want to be the healthiest person in the world, and you think, to be the healthiest person in the world, I have to eat a bunch of Brussels sprouts. Now, the problem is that Brussels sprouts have a certain flavor, and you don't particularly like this flavor. But it actually has very little to do with the actual flavor of Brussels sprouts, and more to do with what goes around the Brussels sprouts. See, let's say that you hadn't eaten food for an entire week. You were absolutely starving, and I gave you a handful of Brussels sprouts. You're going to eat these, you're going to inhale these Brussels sprouts, and you're going to feel amazing. You're going to receive a huge amount of dopamine. They're going to taste fantastic. Now, if I had given you a kilo of steak, if you just eaten an entire kilo of steak, and then I gave you a handful of Brussels sprouts, assuming you even ate the Brussels sprouts, they wouldn't taste so good. They wouldn't produce a lot of dopamine, and the reality is you probably wouldn't even eat the Brussels sprouts in the first place. The question is, did the flavor of the Brussels sprouts actually change? Well, no, they didn't change whatsoever. So then why does your brain in one hand really love the flavor of Brussels sprouts and in the other hand really dislike them? Well, it has to do with what goes around the Brussels sprouts, and this is exactly how we should be thinking about our business. See, if you just consume a huge amount of cheap dopamine all the time, then the idea of you working on your business is not going to feel so good. This would be like eating a huge steak and then being offered a handful of Brussels sprouts. If you did do the work, which is unlikely that you did, you'd probably just say, no, I'm full, I don't want to. But if you did do it, you're not going to enjoy it. It doesn't feel so good. But if you were starving, metaphorically, if you had not received a bunch of cheap dopamine, if you can only really receive dopamine from working on your business, then working on your business is going to make you feel really good and you're going to receive a huge amount of dopamine. So what does this mean? What does this mean if we can create an environment where we can't receive cheap dopamine and we can only really get dopamine from doing things like working on our business? Now, what this means is the amount of time that you're waiting between taking an action and feeling some real sense of achievement, like you've progressed to the next level, this goes up significantly. On average, you're waiting a lot longer between taking actions and feeling a real sense of progress. And what this unlocks is it unlocks the trait of patience. It allows you to wait for longer periods of time. And this had real implications for my life. See, this is a graph of what my school community looked like. Now, this can't even show all the way back to when this began, but this didn't start in June. This started back in January of 2025. And this was flatline. I wasn't getting any members. I was sitting between 30 and 60 members for over a year. Now, if I went back to myself that was addicted to cheap dopamine, that was playing a lot of video games, binge watching a lot, I would have been so used to getting some immediate sense of a reward and accomplishment that I would have quit. There is 0% chance that I would be able to wait over a year seeing these kind of results. But because I got rid of the cheap dopamine, it allowed me to have the patience to sit in a compounding vehicle for long enough to really see it compound and see actual results. And this allowed this business to 10x over the course of 90 days, over about a year, in fact, over a year of accomplishing essentially nothing. This trait of patience literally allowed my business to stay alive. This would not have been intact if I had have been addicted to cheap dopamine. So this is absolutely the first thing. And what this did is it took me away from this equation where I was relying on luck. If I was back in my old ways, I would have relied on luck. I would have relied on the fact that this business grew like crazy within 30 days for me to see some sort of achievement. But because I didn't need luck, because I had to wait more than a year, but I could wait, I was still able to progress and move to the next level. An older version of me addicted to cheap dopamine would have relied upon luck, and I didn't have luck, so I would have failed. But because I didn't have to rely upon luck, because I had this trait of consistency, it allowed this compounding to come into effect. And of course, this means that the equation stays intact. You don't end up with absolutely zero volume because you've given up and you've quit. The very next thing here is that if you're able to get rid of cheap dopamine, then on average, the amount of time that you're waiting between taking an action and receiving some sort of dopamine might go from something like 10 seconds of scrolling to something like 90 minutes. This is a big difference. And this is really, really training your brain to have better focus, to be able to focus on tasks for longer periods of time. And as we know, if you could focus on tasks for longer periods of time, you can get better returns on your time. And again, I saw this play out in real life. See, I was able to track my focus over nearly 20 weeks. I believe this is 18 weeks right here. And I was able to see that I could get my single task focus to around 90 or more minutes on average. This is probably closer to 95 or 100 minutes on average that I was able to focus on one single task without shaking. Now you have to bear in mind that my focus was so bad when I was addicted to cheap dopamine that I was diagnosed with ADHD. I was able to get rid of the cheap dopamine and get my focus up to very, very surprisingly high levels. And as a consequence, this means that our leverage that we're going to get is going to go up significantly. The returns that we get from our work time go up. And of course, this means that the output's going to go up a lot. The last thing I really noticed is that you're not fighting against this friction anymore, where you have to make the decision to do the hard thing rather than do the easy thing that feels really good. You're not having to work with this friction, and therefore you're not making all of these bad decisions. See, it changes the equation quite a bit, because initially you would be going from the choice between choosing the dopamine, choosing feeling really good and just doing the cheap dopamine, or do I feel not so great and just work on my business? We're changing this equation so you're not making this choice. You're really just left with the choice to do the work, and the work produces dopamine and makes you feel really good. And of course, this changes your decision making and your action taking long term from a position where you're just doing a lot of garbage to I just default to doing the work because it's the thing that feels the best. It's the thing that's most accessible for me to get a huge amount of dopamine. Now, I was also able to see this play out in real life. I was able to get my volume on the number one highest priority task to around 4.5 hours every single day. This has now been for over 100 days, and it just continues. And of course, what this means is that the volume is going up. And if the volume is going up, the output is going up. Now, I was surprised by just how much I got out of removing cheap dopamine and just focusing on getting dopamine from real sources. But I think there's really 3 key states that you can be in that you're going to get the most out of removing cheap dopamine. And it's going to depend on really how you want to live your life. The first state here is the business obsession. Now, this is the very, very first state I went through. This lasted me about 30 to 60 days. To be honest, it's not super sustainable, but here what you're doing is you're just receiving dopamine from the business, from working on your business. Now, why is this good? Well, it's good because your volume is going to go up big time. You're simply just getting dopamine from your business. You're going to be spending a lot of time on your business. You're going to be spending most of your waking hours on this. And as a consequence, if your volume goes up a lot, especially if your leverage doesn't go down, then you're going to grow your business pretty quick. Now, there's a few issues I have with this. Particularly, I think that it's very hard to maintain a high degree of leverage, of return on your work time if you're just working all the time. Your brain is going to be a little bit overwhelmed. Burnout potential goes up a lot. There's not a lot of dimensions to your life, but the big benefit here is that your business will grow pretty quickly because your output is quite high. So this is great if you're just unidimensionally obsessed over, I want to grow this business. This is a decent method for doing short term, although I don't like the idea of operating in the short terms. I didn't last very long here because for me, this was just too unidimensional. I didn't see too many other layers and areas of my life improving. This is not how I wanted to live long term, so I didn't last very long here whatsoever. The next state here is the cross-domain domination. Now, I was able to stay in this state for about a year. This lasted me quite a while. I really liked this state. This produces really, really fast results in a lot of areas. What we're doing here is rather than just getting dopamine from your business, you're getting dopamine from your business and a few little side quests as well. So this might be some sort of lifting thing. This might be some sort of fitness endeavor. This could be learning a language. Whatever this is, you're focusing on your business and you're focusing on some side quests. This is how you're getting your dopamine. Either way, it's from real sources. You're not receiving dopamine from binge watching or scrolling or anything cheap. You're getting it from real sources, but you're just progressing in a few different areas. This is why I call it cross-domain domination. Now, the way you have to do this is you have to bear in mind, what is the North Star? What is the number one goal? Because for most of us, the number one goal is going to be growing the business. And this means in terms of a time allocation, this has to take up the majority of your time. Yes, you do these side quests, but they shouldn't take up the bulk of your time. The bulk of your time that you're getting this dopamine from needs to be coming from the business itself. And I think it's really important to talk about the order here of how you go through your days. I would really be thinking about get everything done, get all of your inputs done for the business first, then move on to your first side quest, then move on to your second side quest. There's a reason that you don't start the day with something like working out unless working out and getting in shape is your number one goal, and that is that you're allocating time resources, you're allocating energy resources to something that's not a priority. These things are going to be a complement to your life. They're going to be good to have there, but this is the number one focus. So you do this first, very, very first thing. Now, I implemented this for, as I said, about a year. What this allowed me to do is, first of all, it allowed me to run 12 marathons in 12 months, coming off as a beginner runner, which was really, really good. It allowed me to progress quickly in this. And I was also able to get to conversational fluency in Spanish in 7 months, doing on average 4 hours a day. So I put in about 1,000 hours into Spanish, which was quite a lot, but allowed me to progress that really, really quickly. Now, the very, very important principle to understand here is the 80-20 principle that states that 20% of the work produces 80% of the results, while the other 80% of work produces 20% of results. If you want to push forward and progress a lot of different areas at the same time, you cannot waste time. You have 24 hours in the day. It's a finite resource. If you're wasting time on these 80-20 activities, you're not going to be able to push forward and progress a lot of different things, especially if your side quests, they need to sit in this 80-20 principle. You need to be doing the small set of actions that really push you forward. Not only is this going to allow you to progress these side quests quickly, but it also allows you to take on more and diversify your character, progress in lots of different areas, but you have to live and die by this 80-20 principle. Otherwise, you're going to start sacrificing things like your business. You're going to start sacrificing other side quests. You can't do it all if you don't operate within this 80-20 principle. Now, the third and final state here is the cross-domain domination and lifestyle. Now, this is where I'm currently in. I've been operating in this stage for a little bit over 3 months now. And for me, this is the end game. For me personally, the way I want to live my life, I don't see anything better than this right now. What you're doing is you're receiving dopamine from the work you do, from the side quests you're doing, but also from experiencing the world, from going and exploring cities, from going on dates, from going to sports events, from doing these things, these experiences within the real world, not on your devices. Now, we have to bear in mind here that our business is still the North Star. It is still the number one priority, which means that we allocate our prime mental resources to this. We allocate our time and attention to this first. It is the number one priority. And one of the big reasons that we do this, apart from the fact that it is the number one goal, is that it allows you to unlock more down here. When you're going and experiencing, you can experience more. Because if your business is not doing all that well, you're earning a couple $1,000s a month, then you haven't unlocked a whole lot of the world. You haven't unlocked a whole lot of experiences. So this is a little bit less enjoyable. This is a little bit less of an enriching experience, but assuming we can allocate our prime mental resources, our time and attention to this and grow this, you unlock more down here, more opportunities, and it's just more enjoyable. Now, if you want to, you can cut out a few side quests and this can take up more of your time. Side quests are there because you want to do them. They're there because it's part of your freedom, part of your enjoyment. You're not doing side quests for the sake of doing them. You're doing them because you want to do them. You feel like they're a valuable thing to have in your life. You don't do them for the sake of it. So if you want to spend more time enjoying and experiencing the world and less time on side quests, by all means, do that. I definitely noticed that I spent a crazy amount of time back in stage 2, back in phase 2 on the side quests. And realistically, that's only beneficial if the side quests are really going to push you forward. So you can allocate just more time here to the freedom. Now, in terms of structuring your day here, very important that we allocate our first hours, our prime mental resources to the North Star, to the business. Then after that, we can start working on our side quests. And once we do the side quests, once we've done all the inputs to push forward all of our goals, then you enjoy the freedom. And the beauty of this is that you're experiencing all of this freedom on the back end of progressing and pushing forward a lot of stuff. So this makes this, the dessert at the end of the day, just so much sweeter. Now, again, the 80-20 principle here is more important than ever before. If you want to push forward your business, if you want to push forward some side quests, and you want time at the end of the day to explore the world, experience a bunch of things, you have to be ruthlessly efficient with your time, and you cannot be operating outside of these 80-20s. You simply cannot do it and have all of these things at the same time. You have to really be able to master your time here. Now, what this unlocked is it unlocked me going from living in Australia in Melbourne in my share house, seeing the same things every day with the same people, to be able to go and experience a whole different side of the world, go and live in Argentina first, and then currently in Mexico, going to be moving to Colombia next month, and then Brazil after that. Experience all of these new places, these different foods, these different people, all of these different things, but be able to do this and maintain every single other part of my life. Push my business further forward than I've ever pushed before by being ruthlessly efficient with my time and getting the best possible leverage. Also progressing my side quests extremely quickly by being ruthless with the 80/20s and being able to have the back end of the day to go experience and explore the world. I absolutely love this, but you really need to be able to master your time and be very, very, very efficient. If you're interested in removing all this cheap dopamine and mastering your time so you can progress and scale your business faster, spending less time at the desk so you can progress these side quests and enjoy the freedom on the back end of the day, you can join the Modern Monk community for free. I'll leave a link in the description below for that. For everyone else, if you want to see how I entered state 3 and became more effective with my time and progressed my business and my side quest forward faster while I enjoyed this freedom on the back end as a digital nomad, then you can check out this video right here. So I'll either see you in the Modern Monk community or in that video. Cheers.